I think that the intense interest that Faulkner and Ashbery had in language really comes through in your writing as well, in a way that is not affected or not part of what you called the trappings, which I think this book is wonderfully free from trappings of any sort, thriller trappings, literary, etc. But the moment when Professor Williams walks into the room the first time, and you talk about the light in that room, and the way the light almost becomes a character or a force in the room, that's a real kind of a poet's move to make in that opening scene, and it's very powerful in setting the scene and creating a kind of tension in the reader that most writers would not even have realized that they could take advantage of that kind of an opportunity in a scene. So, did you write poetry at any time?
Oh yes, for a long time I wrote only poetry and no fiction. A lot of that sort of thing comes from my teachers in New York. I remember Lynn Tillman, who was probably one of my favorite teachers, told me once that there is nothing, when you're writing, there is nothing that compares to language. You have nothing. It doesn't matter how good your characters are. It does not matter how fast the plot is. It doesn't matter how good the opening is or the ending is or the climax or whatever. It's all about the language. And that has stayed with me ever since she told me that. And it makes this sort of, it's very simplistic. I mean, obviously, there wouldn't even be a book if there weren't language. But I think especially for thriller writers who tend to not sort of almost shun that sort of thing, where it's just about getting the plot out. And I'm intentionally interested in plot as well, obviously. I do this with this novel. But it all comes from the language. It is, language is the machine that drives everything. And yeah, I think you have to really pay particular attention to your writerly choices if you want the reader to follow you at all.
And it is part of what keeps you turning the pages here. It keeps a certain kind of reader turning the pages as much as the plot. The novel City of Glass is mentioned here by Paul Auster, I think. And how you use that as sort of a foil. How do you think that functions for a reader, and particularly for a reader that may not be that familiar with the novel?
I think that Auster was at first an attempt just to give Mary something to do other than the plot. I knew that she would have to take another class. I knew that she couldn't be 100% focused on Williams's class. And so what could I give her to sort of flesh out her character a little? So I thought I'd give her this other class where she's, it's a literature class. I took a lot of literature classes in college, and we read City of Glass in college. So I thought I'll just use that. But as I began to use it a little more, I saw a lot of comparisons between what I was trying to do and what Auster did so well. And the most obvious sort of symbol is that of identity. In obedience, you never know quite who is whom. You never know what is quite going on. People are often looking through windows into mirror. There is sort of this idea of the skewing of identity. It's not, I hope it's not so heavy-handed, and it's definitely not heavy-handed in City of Glass, which I think is a perfect study of sort of how someone can become so obsessed with something that he loses himself. By the end of that novel, it's a novella actually, Quinn is totally, he doesn't know who he is. He looks different. He's unrecognizable. He's lost everything he owns only because of a wrong phone call that he gets on the first page of the story. And so I think that's kind of what happens to my characters as well. They lose themselves in the crime because of their obsession, or in Williams's class, and then later the crime, because of their obsession to it and with it. And that's just kind of an interesting thing, and I think you see it. It is one of those trappings that you see in genre fiction a lot, in thrillers, where the detective becomes so immersed that he or she just is lost. And I think that's really an interesting trope for literary fiction as well, where identity is often a part of what the writer is trying to do. So I just kind of try to use it as sort of, like you say, a foil. I think that's probably right, but also a symbol that would reference something deeper, one of the deeper themes of the novel.
And I think on a very practical level it works so well because even if the reader doesn't know the novella well or at all, you definitely get the idea that Mary is immersed in this book, and that something about this book is causing her, is doubling up some of the effects of what's happening with her. And as anyone who's been lost in a book knows, you know, it's really easy to walk around kind of feeling like, what world am I in? And she definitely, I think it just enhances her sense of that at the end for the reader, which is wonderful. I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about your process in writing, and in particular writing this novel. I know that writing each book is a different process in some ways, but a lot of our listeners are people who are writing themselves and interested in how writers do it. So,
I wrote this. I probably worked 5 days a week for at least 3-4 hours a day. My son actually sat on the couch beside me and watched Blue's Clues through most of it. You can see some sort of weird references to that. What I think the most important thing is, I didn't put too much pressure on myself. I had no idea what I was going to do with this. I'd finished one novel, but it was just kind of a practice run, and I was just sort of playing around. I mean, I had no preconceptions of what it would look like at the end. I had no idea of what really I was doing. I was just sort of feeling my way through and trying to tell the story that I had in my head. But I think one important thing that I always tell aspiring writers is you got to stick with it, and you have to work consistently on it, because I know for me, and a lot of writers are this way, a lot of ideas crowd in your mind. A lot of sort of different scraps of other things that could possibly be stories. And they'll just charge in there, and you begin to think, well, what if I work on this? You know, this is not going so well right now. I'm going to do this. And so you kind of have to be diligent. You kind of have to sort of set a certain time, I think, of day to go at it and get it out of there, you know, get it, purge it from your mind, because these other things you will go through hard times when you're writing a novel. It's inevitable. And if that happens, then you begin to doubt it. And so the best way to sort of alleviate that doubt is to kind of say, I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can on it, and then finish it, finish the first draft and move on. It always amazes me when I hear writers say it took me years to write a novel. I can't imagine that. I could never do anything like that, because I would quit. I would just give up if I were working for a long period of time. So I work fast and I write fast, and that's the way I kind of like it, because then you can say, I'm done with this, now let's move on to this other thing.
So you think that the main word would be persistence or diligence, or just kind of sticking with it and not letting it go?
Yeah, I think also it's believing in oneself. I think writers are constantly filled with doubt. The writers know, you know, you're often wondering, is my work good enough? Is my work as good as another writer I know who's exactly my age? Is my work as good as this other writer I know who I found in the bookstore the other? And you're checking yourself off of because it's a competitive field, and because it's so solitary and lonely, you're just, you know, nobody is really reading your work for a lot of the time. Usually it's you at the computer or writing a longhand or whatever. And because of that, you have to find ways around the doubt. And you have to sort of give yourself hope, because nobody else is going to do it. And so I found it just to go as quickly as possible, and to believe in your own ear, you know, and believe in your own sort of talent.
For a lot of writers that I encounter as a teacher, the struggle with balancing writing with other demands in life. You mentioned your son sitting next to you on the couch, you know, family, work, you know, jobs, just the day-to-day struggle to get everything done that you have to get done. How did you address that balance? And you mentioned setting aside a certain time of day. How strict were you about all of that?
Well, we were lucky because our son was pretty easy. He would sit, and you know, he's not too hyper. He's a little bit hyper, but and so he allowed me to do that. I've read that Toni Morrison, when she was writing The Bluest Eye, one of her first novels, she had to write it with her son. She wrote on a typewriter, and her son was an infant or a toddler, and she wrote while the son was on her lap, the child was on her lap, and she said that he was not easy to deal with at all, and so she would have to write a paragraph, and then he would scream, and she would have to pick him up and then sit down, and it kind of came out in a lurching sort of way. And so for me, it was much easier than that, because he kind of allowed me to do what I wanted, but it's become more difficult because we have another child now, and 2 young children is much more difficult than obviously 1. It's not double the work; it's much worse than that. And so, so I've had to sort of go out of my way to do weird things, like I write at the Borders bookstore in Louisville. I go out and write in the cafe. That sounds like a great idea, but it's not great after a while, because the other customers will begin to really kind of annoy you. You know, they don't know they're doing that. Yeah, and well, they're sort of just their talk and chatter, and it's kind of, especially if you're having a tough day, it's not the best thing in the world. So you have to sort of be creative. I've written, you know, in various bookstores, and I went to the library, and you know, different things, to kind of get your own space. And I think that's the most important thing, finding your own little world that you can escape to and say, okay, and get in that world at a similar time every day, and say, okay, here's what I'm doing right now. Everything else is going to be outside, and I'm going to do this for at least 3-4 hours. And then I can come back into the other world, you know, with my children. And that's the most important thing, I think.
I think you're right. I mean, I think that it is a struggle, and there are a lot of creative ways to work around it when you have young children, but the most important thing is just showing up at the desk again and again.
One other thing that I found is really important is to believe in your story. If you're a novelist, be excited when you go into that world. It becomes a real drag when you're unsure about the story. I've heard a lot of writers say it's hard work, and I dread it every day. But that's what makes it rewarding. They work through it, it's a slog, and then at the end of the day they've got this finished product, and they're proud of that. I can't work like that. I have to be excited and fired up when I go off to do the writing. And I have to say, all right, this is what I'm going to do. This is going to be great. You know, I remember writing Obedience. I was really, writing those first few pages, I was thinking to myself, this is going to be excellent. I've never done anything quite like this. I've read a lot of thriller novels, but I've never written one. This is going to change the way that I look at my own writing. I had no idea it would be published or anything like that. But I was just excited every day.
Just for the process of it.
And when for me personally, when it becomes tough, is when I really begin to lose myself in it. And you know, I understand that it is work and it should be work, but it should also be, I think, fun in certain ways too.
I think you're exactly right. I love Ray Bradbury, and he talks about writing in such a wonderfully positive way, about jumping out of bed every morning and things blowing up, and what's blowing up is his story, and he's going to go to it and find out what all that debris is about, you know. And for me, I was going to ask this earlier, if it doesn't feel like you're coming back to old friends in a way, as you come back to the novel day after day, you re-enter that world, and there's something there that you yourself as the writer want to find out, you know, what's going to happen next, and how is this character going to deal with this particular thing, and it sort of unfolds in you, and it's almost in a way of you're witnessing this unfolding, which is a wonderful thing. And I'm glad you stressed that idea of enjoying the work, being joyful in it, because I think it shows up in the writing, and it comes through to the reader.